Today, let's talk about 12-step, which is the closest thing in modern America we have to a working theology. Millions of people have crawled into a church basement, declared themselves powerless, and have somehow emerged as more powerful because of it. That is spiritually, psychologically interesting, to say the least. Yet the 12 steps themselves, the principles of the program are a bit hazy. So today, let's go into it. What 12-step gets right, what it gets wrong. Alcoholics Anonymous is the main 12-step program, as you know, but this analysis will be relevant for any of the program's denominations, I guess you could say. To put a post in the ground, 12-step is a solid program. If you're actively destroying yourself with some kind of substance, then it greatly behooves you to at least check it out. I recommend it to clients all the time. And people who have been through 12-step are usually a lot easier to work with, not because the program fixes them necessarily, but it does at least ground them in what it takes to truly grow and develop, which is something that is lost on a lot of modern therapy. The problem with 12-step, as I was saying, is it's hazy, it's vague, it's not wrong, it's just not specific enough to be helpful, or as helpful as it could be, because I do think the program's helpful. And where this vagueness shows up most critically, detrimentally, is in the concept of power, both higher power, or God, and powerlessness. These concepts can be interpreted in two fundamentally different ways. One of them is healthy. The other will most definitely lead to a slow, steady, painful psychological death. The question isn't whether you need to admit your powerlessness and surrender to God. You do. That's the easy part, and that's coming from an atheist. Rather, the real question is, what exactly is God, and what are you surrendering to, and what part of you is doing the surrendering? And a good way to analyze this nuance is through an analysis of the 12 steps themselves. I mean, don't worry, we're not going to go through each step in particular, mostly the first 3 steps, because that's where the metaphysics of the program happened. To step 1, we admitted we are powerless over alcohol. Our lives have become unmanageable. Yes, you are powerless over the alcohol. That is correct. And not just in like a sad, hand-wringing kind of way. I mean, structurally, philosophically, you're powerless. Because what is alcohol in the context of addiction? It is your payoff. All right, so let's go to the loop. One of the 3 fundamental principles of therapy where alcohol is here. It's the payoff. It's the symptom. It's not the problem. It is the result of how you have mismanaged your emotions. The first thing you must do is you must repress your healthy anger with, here, if you're repressing the healthy anger, it would be unhealthy anxiety. If this was healthy anxiety, this would be a positive, healthy loop. Then the anxiety would help you engage with your anger, with your fundamental psychological need. So that's what you do first. When you do that, then you isolate. Obviously, if you're cutting off your healthy needs from other people, then you are necessarily isolating. But this is painful, right? Steps 1 through 3 are painful, especially if you do it a lot. You've maybe done it for years or decades. So you have to take the pain away. You have to do something to take the pain away. And it's no different than if you had a huge cut on your leg, a huge gaping gash on your leg. You would have to do something about it. Once you have the cut, you need to do something about it. You can suture it up. You can just let it go and it'll get gangrenous and you'll probably die. Eventually. That's not up to you once you have the cut. And it's the same thing. Once you cut yourself in two by repressing your healthy needs with your unhealthy anxiety, then you need to do something to remove that pain. And that's what the alcohol is there for. And I tell this to clients all the time. The payoff is out of your control. You're worried about your self-criticism. You're spiraling because of your bad habits. Forget it. That's the runny nose. Let's focus on the virus. Let's focus on the root of the issue. And sure, everybody says they get to the root of your issue, but without a clear theory of what emotions are, how they inform your identity, how that informs your self-awareness, then you have no way to know what the root of your issue is and when you get to it. Anyway, here's where 12 steps can get blurry, because while powerless over the payoff, the alcohol, is healthy and accurate, it too often gets generalized. And you become powerless over your emotional content, right? Your relationship with your anger and your anxiety. And that's when we slide into slave morality. You'll hear it in phrases all the time like, well, I'm powerless over whether I get this job. I'm going to put it in God's hands, which sounds nice. But really what this means is, because I'm not omnipotent, because I don't have total control of the outcome, I'm just going to be powerless. That is passive aggressiveness towards existence itself, which is pretty impressive. But really what happens, obviously when your powerlessness becomes generalized, is you shut down your healthy anger, your healthy needs. You're not surrendering to the will of God. You're avoiding responsibility. You're protecting yourself from failure by pretending it's noble to not even try. Yeah, but that's the problem with being vague, right? You're going into the chest cavity and you think you're working on the left ventricle. Really, you're slicing open the aorta, and you're wondering why you're bleeding out all over the operating table. When you generalize powerlessness, you may end your suffering, short term, but then you amputate your volition, your will, your agency. You cut off a part of yourself. You're not letting go, right? You're giving up. And the problem is the 12-step program is unable to give you these tools to tell the difference. That's why you need to learn to be exacting with these things. So when you get to your payoff, you say things like, yes, I am powerless. I admit I'm powerless over whatever, my self-criticism. And that's why I focus on what I can do about my fundamental psychological need. And when I get distracted by the payoff, I am ever more able to see it as the payoff. I see it as the payoff, and it's how my self-criticism is really how I make myself feel superior. When I feel superior, I get to protect myself. Deep down, you don't want to be powerless. You want something, you really want to get that job. You want to know what it's like to want something. So yes, powerlessness. When that generalizes to the emotional content, you're going to have a bad time. Yeah, I just watched Enter the Dragon too much when I was a kid. The second half of this step is about unmanageability. What does a manager do? He makes decisions. When your life is unmanageable, that means you have no willpower. And this is what I say all the time about what therapy is for. It's for when you can no longer make the decisions you want to make. You have no volition. You can know what to do. You can know what's healthy. You can know what's right. And it's going to move your life forward in a way that you would want, and you still not do it. You want to say no, but your mouth is full of whiskey. Thank you. So is it good to be powerless? Well, it depends on the context. Powerlessness over the payoff, good, true, absolutely necessary. Powerlessness over your emotions, your needs, that is rationalized despair. Okay, so step 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. This is, again, extremely true and helpful when you take it in the right context. If you understand the nuance here, and if you don't, then this step will quietly ruin you. Yes, there is a power greater than you. That's not a spiritual claim, simply good diagnostics. You admitted in step 1 that you have lost control. You are not in charge. So something is. The question is what? What holds the power, of course, is this: your anger, your anxiety, your emotional content, and your relationship with it. Now, I'm not saying anger is God, but if God were to exist here in this existence, in this realm, then yes, your anger would definitely be a part of it, him. That's how I conceptualize it, at least. And I'm challenging you to conceptualize it in your own way. Anger here isn't rage or hostility or violence or abuse. It's simply an emotional response to a healthy need of a need To repeat myself, a need you have for no other reason than you have it. This is your drive to innovate, to individuation, to become more of who you are, this force, this anger, this fire within. Um, it is greater than you, if by you, you mean your limited conscious perception, that part of you that's cut off, that's disconnected from your unconscious, the part of you that keeps promising that you're going to quit drinking on Monday. But trouble starts when you take this too literally and you think that the power greater than yourself is really literally greater than yourself, right? When you put the higher power in another realm, then what happens? In order to be a good person, to grow, to develop, you must renounce a part of yourself. Not only your addiction, but your will, your desire, your anger, your needs. And because you've already misread powerlessness from step one as global and metaphysical, then this will cement in your mind that self-resignation is a virtue. And you'll start to say things, again, like, well, I'm powerless over whether I get a wife, so I'm going to put it in God's hands, which again sounds nice, but really what this indicates is your fear, right? I'm afraid to want something, so I'm going to call my fear faith and hope that the universe is magic somehow. But here's where I will give 12-step credit, is because they don't tell you what God is, right? You get to choose your own God, your higher power. And that's a big step for religion to take. Even better, I consider it very American, right? You get to choose. You get to choose what your God is. It's an important decision. You need to choose wisely. So you can either imagine that God is a symbolic representation of concepts that you absolutely must wrestle with, of values that you must have in order to become whole and develop an identity. Or you can imagine him as this floating sky parent who just wants you to stop drinking and go to meeting. One of these helps you grow, the other keeps you comfortable, which means small. And I get it. A lot of people say, well, God is beyond your comprehension, but you need to try to comprehend what this is. You need to put it in concepts you can grasp. You might start to find that God is more helpful that way. The more clearly you can conceptualize what God is, the more clearly you'll understand what you're surrendering to. And faith will stop meaning fear and I give up, and really begin to mean, I know what I want. I know what I serve. I know what I stand for, and I'm willing to be reshaped by it. So yes, step 2 is true when rightly understood. There is a power greater than you, but it's not outside of you. It's definitely not above you. It's, if anything, deeper than you, deeper than what you're able to handle maybe at the present moment. And the goal of therapy and recovery alike is to reconnect with this and not avoid it. To step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. So this is, again, easy to see how this is healthy when your concept of God is grounded in reality, right? When your higher power represents concepts, values like confrontation of the unconscious, individuation, epistemology, time, or like respect for time, your healthy needs, your healthy goals, then what you're saying, that's just as an example, then what you're saying is, I will submit. I will submit to the laws of reality, to what is true, even when I'm comfortable. I will be honest, even when it hurts, and I will notice my symptoms. I will notice my symptoms as a distraction from, sending that email. And it's just as easy to see how this step 3 can be unhealthy, right? If your concept of God is floating in outer space, when you have no ability to have like some direct relationship with it, right? Then your higher power will represent avoidance. And you'll inevitably surrender the responsibility you have for that emotional content. And, this will just tack on itself from the renunciation from step 2. So you see how like some misinterpretation in these steps will compound on itself, which if nothing else speaks to the logic. There is a logical order to these steps. Then we have steps 4, 5, and 6, which I'll group together. 4 is made a searching, fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admit to God, to ourselves, to another human exact nature of our wrongs. And 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. All right, so step 4 is a moral inventory. Yes, self-examination is essential. How you do it matters, of course, but whatever, I'm not going to go into that now. I could, and it probably would relate very well with everything else we're talking about here, but I talk about that in pretty much every other video, so go check that out. Step 5 sounds like a confession. Also good. Journaling is a part of this process. I would even say it's necessary. Putting words to your feelings, especially your healthy anger. But you don't really see yourself until another pair of eyes are staring back at you. And then step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. First of all, defects of character, what is that? That's your payoff. That's your symptom. That's your unconscious protection strategies, right? You criticize yourself so you feel superior, so you can isolate and numb out. Yeah. But it's important to know. Yeah. But it is important to know and to have those character defects ready, boil them down to a few words. So when you're psychoanalyzing yourself, which is where all therapy ends up, you have guideposts in your mind. Right? So that's why I like this step. I also like this step because it involves looking at your own faults. And this is what I was talking about before, like really what it takes to change and grow. When people enter therapy, they think, well, how will I ever be able to forgive my mother? But when it's conducted properly, they leave thinking something like, how will my mother ever be able to forgive me? Or how will I ever be able to go on from this? I mean, maybe not that dramatic, but you get my point. But the problem arises, of course, when you have God in some other realm remove these defects of character. Then it's, again, with the renunciation. But now you also see why the word disease gets tossed around a lot, right? When you think that renunciation is the only cure, then you're telling yourself that you have some inveterate problem. And you say, Mark, well, renunciation worked for me or this other guy. No, it didn't. It really didn't. You can only heal the extent you integrate, not renunciate. You think it's your renunciation, but really it's because you're going to meetings, talking to people, setting up chairs, making coffee, you're connecting, and that's what recovery is. I also need to mention that this step begins with, we were entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. Entirely ready, that's asking a lot. Nobody's entirely ready. I've known that self-righteousness is one of my, many character defects. I've known this for 20 years. I still need it. It still makes my life very meaningful. I think you're going to be as ready as you're ever going to be, and that is plenty ready enough, given your current, range of emotional awareness. Step 7, humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. That's one of the same. We don't have to go into that. Step 8 and 9, I'll group together. 8, made a list of all people we have harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So this is great. Famously, the founders of AA were in communication with Carl Jung about this idea. And I don't know exactly what his influence was over these 2 steps, but he at least gave some kind of informal write-off. And it's all over Jung's writings. I was just reading Battle for Deliverance from the Mother. It's like about 25 pages of gold in volume 5. And this is what Jung's talking about in Julius Caesar, the squabble between Brutus and Cassius. Cassius is still attached to his mother. He's still identified with his mother. So now everybody else must deal with his erratic moods. Making amends is one way to take responsibility for those moods, and of course the dysregulation that leads to them. The other thing I like about this step 8 and 9 is they don't come at the beginning. These steps go in a certain order that really makes sense. You work up to them. You don't do step 8 and 9 before the self-examination, right? So if you're still thinking, my mom, she's the one who owes me an apology, I don't owe her an apology, then you kind of know, where you are with this. And steps 10 through 12, that's just keeping the process alive. I would call that the ritual, whatever. Anyway, what this comes down to is the concept of God. What is he? More importantly, where is he? Is he in another realm? Then fine. But as long as you speak of him, yes, then you necessarily concede that he is in this realm. And I encourage you to get clear on what that is so you can interact with it, so you can create a better relationship with it. And 12 steppers, they say it themselves. It's in the Serenity Prayer. Grant me the ability to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Because when we do that with some epistemological integrity, then 12 step doesn't just offer sobriety, right? It offers a structure for building a healthier relationship with reality, which is why I say it's the closest thing in America that we have to an actual functioning church. I would even say this was the original Christian church, right? Before Paul legislated his obsessive thoughts and the Neoplatonist apologists set down the catechism. The only reason they were Neoplatonists is they didn't know about Aristotle. And that's what the church was, right? Before that, it was people sitting around in a group, confessing their sins, helping each other out. A lot of people say that 12-step is a Christian organization, but I'd say it's the other way around. Christianity is a 12-step organization, or that's what it was at its inception, I would argue. I'm not trying to make a point here other than just, offer some perspective. So, if you have any kind of addiction, alcohol, weed, painkillers, porn, that's probably 99% of you who do have an addiction, that I encourage you to seek out 12-step. It's free. There are pitfalls, sure. But there's a way to navigate this program or any other program that you choose to join in a way that will inevitably develop psychological health for you and involves integrating the 3 principles of therapy. To find out more what that would entail, go check out my book, link in the description. I also do free consultations, joinanimus.com/schedule. Once you learn to be exacting with your psyche, you don't even have to solve your problems half the time. Half the problems, you have just solve themselves. I did a similar video on this, on the metaphysical nature of Jesus, what that must be. So I'll link it here. So go check that out. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it there. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for watching to the end. Please like and subscribe. And I wish you all the pain and joy that comes from developing a healthier relationship with a higher power of your understanding.